Hi, everybody. My name is AJ, and I'm a grateful sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. I would like to start by saying thank you to Lisa for asking me to speak. I do not own a pair of slacks, so I also apologize for wearing jeans tonight. I was not in the mood to wear a dress, so it's a little more formal than what I'm used to. I make that amends up front. I also want to welcome the newcomers. Anyone who is new, whether you announced yourself or not, I hope that you know that you are welcome, wanted, and needed. You are vital to the success of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I say that after being here for a few 24 hours and understanding that I come to meetings today because it is something that I enjoy, but I also know that it is vital for me to work with other alcoholics. And if the new members are not coming in and feeling welcomed and like they are a part of, this program will not continue. And so I hope that you hear something tonight that keeps you coming back and that lets you know that there's something here for you in this room that can change your life, because it changed mine. My sobriety date is August the 15th of 2007. I got here the first time when I was 21 years old. I've stayed since I was 22 years old. I'm going to tell my story a little differently tonight than I usually do, so bear with me. My life at 21 years old was very, very difficult, and it was very challenging, and it was all as a result of my actions. I was facing 10 years in prison as a 21-year-old young woman. And as I sat in a 6x6 jail cell, I did not think that my behavior had accumulated the necessity for me to be sitting in Santa Rita and facing federal prison charges, but I was, and I was terrified. And it's the same level of fear that existed in me most of my young childhood growing up in an alcoholic home. That fear had carried me most of my life to actions I had taken and the places that I had been. And my gracious and loving higher power had saw fit to carry me through all of those things to put me where I was. And I firmly believe today that there is nothing in my life that has happened by mistake. There is nothing in my life that has happened that God did not intend for me to find, to have, or experience. I use the word God not because it's the big Jesus that exists somewhere in this room, but because it is an acronym for guidance and overwhelming despair. Every single time that I have sought God, that I have reached out, that I have been desperate enough, God has shown up for me, often in spite of myself. It's not the God that I grew up with. It's not the God that I read in the Bible. It's not any of those things. It is an overwhelming sense of intuition and feeling that lives in me that through the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and a set of spiritual tools that I have learned here, I've been able to grasp, understand, and put to use in my life. But it did not come easy. I have grown up in this program. I have done things wrong in this program. I have made amends to public groups in this. I have done many things much in spite of how other people have tried to give me direction and rules and all kinds of other things. I had spent much of my life feeling different. And when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous, I still felt different, but I also didn't want to feel different anymore. So I did what other people told me to do. I walked into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous at Winchester Fellowship, which is in Santa Clara, California. I walked in on a Saturday night. It was a candlelight meeting. And what I heard there was a woman talk about how at 90 days of sobriety, she had watched her son, who was riding his bike in front of her house, get hit by a car and he died. He was 11 years old. She didn't drink over that, and I couldn't fathom it. My little pea brain that had not been sober more than a year could not understand how somebody could watch something so incredibly dramatic and not drink about it. Because everything that had happened up until my life at that moment, I had drank around. I was a periodic drinker. I drank every single time I had a feeling I did not want to feel or an event happened that I didn't want to experience. Everything in between, I was relatively sober, but I was a mess when I wasn't. I was more of a mess when I wasn't drinking than when I was, because I had uncontrollable feelings. I was angry and I was violent. Those are the things that I came to Alcoholics Anonymous with. To back up to my childhood, as I mentioned, I grew up in an alcoholic home. My dad was an alcoholic. His dad was an alcoholic. My mom's dad was an alcoholic. My great aunt was an alcoholic. I was surrounded by bottles of liquor from the time that I literally could see up to a table. My first memory of like really experiencing anyone drinking was being out in the driveway with my dad. I'm in a diaper and watching beer cans roll around because we were working on cars. His motorcycle buddies were always around. We were always wrenching on something, and I was almost always shooting a gun because my dad's from Texas and we believe in guns. And that was normal. All of our childhood friends, their parents drank the exact same way that my parents did. And the only time I know that my dad ever tried to stop drinking was when I was 3. His younger brother had been murdered, and he didn't know what to do. And so he went to AA. He did not feel welcomed. He walked out of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and he died 12 years later. And so I remember being a happy and gregarious and very outgoing child. I danced from the time I was 4 years old. I did ballet, hip hop, and jazz until I was 11. I was the lead in my choir at church. I went to Sunday school. I read the Bible. I did what everybody told me to do. I also sustained undeniable injuries at the hands of physical, mental, and sexual abuse. And they were not things that anybody talked about ever. The elephant always lived under the rug. Nobody ever talked about anything. My dad would throw plates at the walls at dinner. I was 6 years old making dinner for our family, and when it wasn't done right, you knew. By the time I was 7 years old, I had developed an eating disorder. And when anyone in my family talked about my weight, at one point I actually tried to stab my sister in the face. Then I tried to burn down our house. I didn't want the life that God had given me, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand why everything was happening to me. It wasn't even just a victim mentality. It was absolute overwhelm and undeniable just grief around everything that had happened. And there were no words, there was no explanation. And I will also say that that does not make me an alcoholic. These are things that I came into Alcoholics Anonymous with, that I got to unpack, and that have undeniably helped me help other women and men walk through the things that happened to them before they came into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. Those were defects that I thought that I walked in with, that would be things that I would have to be shamefully harboring my entire life, as opposed to being able to say, like, hey, I've walked through this. I know what it feels like. I know what it looks like. And you don't have to live with it anymore, because there's something who loves you more than you loved yourself at that moment in your life, where you made a choice that you feel like you can't take back. And so chaos, just absolute complete chaos. And by the time that I was 11 years old, our family was in complete disarray. My older sibling was threatening to commit suicide if my dad didn't leave, because while he was a functioning alcoholic, he worked 2 jobs. He also was not normal. And so my mom asked him to leave. He moved back to Texas, where he was from. And the little alcoholic in me that had already started, my ism was already alive and well in the violence, in the lies, in the theft, in all the external grabs that I tried to make fix the different feelings that I felt within me. And none of it worked. And the only thing that I felt any relation to was my dad, because I identified with him without knowing what that identification was. And he left. And I was completely devastated. I hated the feeling, and I did not for once want to feel. And I could identify that. And I discovered other substances before I discovered alcohol. They didn't work like alcohol. It was fine, but it wasn't fun. It didn't do anything for me. And then when I was 13, I discovered alcohol. My first drink was from a bottle of Hot Damn. I don't know if you know what that is, but it's cinnamon liquor. They compare it to Fireball. I've never had that. but it literally burns when it goes down. And the fiery feeling that occurred in my chest in that moment, I wanted more of that. I often have described it as a teddy bear who had their seams ripped open. All of my insides were ready to come out, and I didn't care. I was ready to go. And by the end of that night, I was on my boyfriend's linoleum floor making bloop bloop noises like I was a fish in a fishbowl and thought I was having the time of my life. And the only thing that I was doing was embarrassing my sibling. My boyfriend didn't quite know what to do with me. And everybody is like, who is she? And I made a number of other compromising decisions that night. And by the end of that night, I was in tears and was really ready to go home and couldn't go home because I was so absolutely tanked that my mom would not have handled that well. And so I hid. I actually hid in my boyfriend's garage that night until at like 3:00 in the morning, my mom comes and is like looking for me with a flashlight and is like, oh, here you are. And at that point, I've sobered up enough for her not to know that I was completely blitzed 4 hours ago. But she takes me home, and that was kind of the beginning of the end. My drinking was short and destructive. The alcoholic progression that it talks about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I experienced that 7 years. It talks about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it's not about how much you drank. It's not about where you drank, who you did it with, or any of the other externals. It is about what alcohol does to you on the inside. The triangle that we use to talk about unity, service, and recovery, that also is the trifold of our disease. When you think about it, the disease is a triangle as well. It is the disease of the mind. It is the absolute obsession that has lived in my brain since I was old enough to think. It is the allergy in my body that I experienced the first time that I consumed alcohol. And it's the spiritual malady, which is that feeling of difference, that feeling of never belonging, that feeling of emptiness that occurs in me that I have no explanation for and no reason to explain its existence. That's the trifecta of what I come from. That is what alcoholism means. It means that when I take a substance into my body, there is something that happens that I cannot physically explain, but my body doesn't process the alcohol, and yet I still want more. And how did I get to the drink even after I swore I wasn't gonna drink? This brain tells me that I can drink safely even after I have proven over and over again that it is not safe for me to drink. And that was my life for the next 7 years. And I never did try and stop drinking. As I mentioned, I was a binge drinker. I would go through periods where stuff would be happening in my life that I felt it necessary to drink around. And then I would have long periods of where everything was fine, or I was medicated by a psychiatrist or a number of other things. But what was always constant was the unmanageability of my life. The powerless that I felt when I did drink, I had no control over how much I was going to take. My 18th birthday, I had 18 shots of vodka. And I was not drunk. Was literally not drunk. Walked to the car straight as a freaking arrow. And then when I got home, fell off a doghouse while I was sitting outside smoking a cigarette. My mom's like, what's wrong with you? And it took the alcohol hours to hit me. I did the same thing just shy of my 21st birthday. I had been at a party. I took 19 shots of Jägermeister. I then proceeded to get in my car. Yeah, that face is what I made every single time I drank Jaeger, but the shit worked. It got to the point. It's disgusting. I hate licorice, period, point blank, but it worked. That tells you what kind of alcoholic I am. I never had to drink NyQuil actually sounded good because, again, the licorice, I'm like, it has to work. It tastes like that stuff. Just shy of my 21st birthday, I was at a house party, took 19 shots, did not think I was drunk, got in the car. It was raining that night, and had 4 other friends in the car, missed my exit doing 100 on the freeway, flipped around on 101 and went to go hit the ramp where there is a cop with another accident that has just happened. And granted, I did not get arrested that night. Nobody died, but my friends hated getting in a car with me after that. That's the only time I remember driving intoxicated, but I'm sure it happened other than that. I was purely, bless you. I, um, I was unable to admit that what I had done was injurious to myself or others. The pure level of denial that existed in me is something that when I look back on it, there have often been times that I have wondered, why was I able to be so honest on that first four step? My first four step was 54 pages long. Yeah, I was angry. I was very angry, and mostly I was angry at myself. Everything that I looked at, when I looked at everything that had happened, you know, um, I was not proud of the person I had become. I had become a hook, line, and sinker, the same person who broke apart my family, that broke my mother's heart. I became the part of my dad that I couldn't stand, and nobody knew how to fix it. Nobody. I had had multiple introductions to Alcoholics Anonymous at the point where I went to jail. The year that my dad died, I got sent to 5 different schools, one of which was a school for kids that were facing juvenile hall. And at that school, every Tuesday and Thursday, they had an AA meeting where I would promptly set up the chairs and walk out of the room. I didn't want anything to do with people who sat in a group and talked about their problems. I already hated therapy. I wasn't doing it with a whole bunch of people I didn't know. And I always looked at the people and thought that they looked better than when they walked in, but I still left. That same year, I got sent to an independent studies program where the teacher, who would be my teacher, was a 35-plus-year member of this program. And he 12-stepped me every day in spite of myself. And I didn't even know it till I got here. And I ran into him in a meeting and I was like, now I understand what you were doing. He is somebody who I hold very dear in my life. When I was 18, I had a boyfriend whose parents, to this day, are still members of this program. They watched me smoke weed on their front porch. They never kicked me out. They loved me in spite of myself over and over again. That same love and tolerance is exactly what I have experienced every single time I've walked into a room of Alcoholics Anonymous. Regardless of the mistakes I'm making or the sometimes things that I do at other people's expense and the amends that I have to make, the reality is that I have experienced unwavering love, tolerance, kindness, compassion in these rooms. And I didn't know anything about that. I did not know anything about that before I got here. And so when I was 19, my mom kicked me out. I'd been living in a van. I kind of hopped around all over the place. My life was super dysfunctional. I started really stealing from my employer. And in the state of California, when you steal from an employer over a certain amount of money, it's considered embezzlement. And embezzlement is a federal crime. And it's punishable by up to 10 years in prison. And that's how at 21 years old, I was facing 10 years in prison. And I remember I had been living in my van. The sheriff's department for Santa Clara County called me and they said, hey, is this so-and-so? And I was like, yeah, who are you? I didn't usually answer on block numbers. It was usually my dealer wanting his money and I owed him a lot of money, so I didn't answer. But I had answered this phone call and a cop on the other end of the phone says, hey, we need to talk to you. And I was like, oh, okay. And it was something in me that was not me. I will guarantee you it was not me, because usually I would have just hung up the phone and ran. I was really good at running. And instead I said, I'm going to have to get back to you because I didn't have anywhere for them to come meet me. I was living in my van in a skate park parking lot. And what's funny about that now is that it's now a police station. They tore down the skate park and made it a police station. And every time I drive by it, I'm like, God, you're funny. I'm like, you're so funny. I'm like, you just remind me every single day what my life could be like if if I don't do things well. And so I called my mom And I was like, hey, I don't know what's going on, but the cops need to come talk to me. And the first words out of her mouth are, what did you do? Because up until that point, it was always, what did you do? Never what's wrong or any of those other, parental questions. It was always, what did you do? And I said, I'll tell you when I get there. And that's when she knew it was bad. I knew what I had done. I knew what I had done. And so I went to her house and I waited for the cops to call me back. I told her everything that happened and she just cried. I think it was the first time outside of my dad dying that I remember my mom sobbing. And and I remember thinking about how out of control I had felt for the last few years of my life. And that I had no answers for anything as much as I had pretended that I did. And as much as I always came up with something to say about everything. And so the cops came to her house. It's the same house that I grew up in. It was my grandpa's house before it was her house. It literally, everybody on that block watched me come out of the womb, go into diapers and grow up. And so when a cop car was sitting outside of my mom's house, they knew that it wasn't good. And when they took me outside in handcuffs, the entire neighborhood is out there watching like it's Maury Povich. And I remember thinking like I was a nighttime television melodrama and I had nothing to say. I told the cop as much as I could in that moment. And I was still coming down from the night before. And I hadn't been drinking. I had been using other substances and was quite erratic. And I remember getting in the cop car and he drives away from my mom's house and he asked me, he said, you look like a nice girl. You come clearly from a nice place. And what are you doing? And for the first time in my life, I actually said, I don't know. That was an act of God because the me that lives in me would have said, well, da, 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 and started the clown show and gave you some circus about what had happened in my life. And for the first time in my life, I said, I don't know. And I feel like that was the moment that God saw his window and was like, here we go. Because everything from that moment changed. They took me to a 6x6 holding cell where there was a woman sitting next to me who was snorting the last of her cocaine out of her bra. And she offered me some. And I was never one to deny sweaty coke. I didn't need to know where it came from or any of that other stuff. But I looked at her and I said, no. I was like, no, thank you. And that alone was an act of God because I should have been right there ready to go, like change the way I feel. And I said, no. But that also not taking that substance made me absolutely irritable, restless, and discontent. And by the time they put me in general population, the first girl who came and talked to me, I cannot tell you what she looked like. I cannot tell you what she said to me. I popped her right in the face. Because in this little brain, my alcoholism tells me I'm better off in a 6x6 cell by myself. It tells me that I'm better off alone because that's the level of loneliness that I had felt my entire life. That is the level of separation that I had had between me and everyone who loved me, including God. So I hit her, they take me to solitary confinement. And when I get to solitary confinement, it's a lovely 6x6 cell with nothing but a tin bed, a tin toilet, a tin mirror. And I avoided the mirror as much as possible. Because as I said, I'm violent and I already have proven I don't like myself. I don't like other people, but it's mostly because I don't like me. I'm not proud of the person I've become. I'm uncomfortable in my own skin and I have no solution to that. The only solution I have is on the outside. I can't get to it. And so what do? I sit in a room by myself with this brain and a whole lot of alcoholic thinking. And I'm grateful that I had an attorney when I went to that alternative school for juvenile hall kids. There was a man there who was an attorney, and he sat on the board of a sober living house that also is a rehab. And I remembered his name, and I told them to call him. I cannot tell you where that act of God came from because he is one of the only two. I remember two names from that entire experience, his and another man. And so they called him, and when they got him on the phone, he's like, "How much money do you have with you?" And I said, "I have $1. I literally came in with $1 in my pocket." And he's like, "Okay, cool. I'll take your case for $1." Yet again, another act of God. In overwhelming despair, there was someone that God instructed to be put in my life to give me something that I could not give to myself. And so he fought my case for $1. He also wrote in to the agreement that I would eventually take that my charges should get reduced to a misdemeanor. I would not see any federal prison time, that I could go to an outpatient rehab facility, that I would have all of these stipulations. And if I agreed to them, that I could then be released. But release took a little bit of time. They still wanted me to have consequences, which, I didn't mind. I was getting 3 hots in a cot, don't eat the meat. And I was okay. I was okay enough to not be acting out. I was nice to people. People were nice to me. And one day, one of the guards came and told me, he's like, "Hey, you have a visitor." And I was like, and it wasn't a privileged visit, because privileged visits only came at certain times and certain days. And I said to him, "No, you've got it wrong. It's not me." And he's like, "No, honey, she's here to see you." And I walked downstairs, and across from the glass is a woman who I've never seen before. Her name was Carol. She actually lived in Walnut Creek, and had come to Oakland to see me. And she introduced herself as Carol, said that she was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that she hoped to help save my life. I didn't know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous truly in that moment. But this woman did not know me from a speck of dirt on the ground, and had taken time out of her life to come see who I am and what I'm about. And I remember sitting there quietly, not really understanding why she had come. And I said, "I don't know you." And she's like, "No." She had explained that she was standing behind my mom in a grocery store checkout line. And in Santa Clara, if you ever come to Santa Clara, there's one Safeway. And everybody who works in that Safeway actually worked at my elementary school. Every checkout lady you're going to meet, every bagger in some way or another has some experience with me as a child. And my mom is standing there telling the checkout lady, who was my kindergarten yard duty, that I'm going to prison and that she doesn't know what to do. And Carol said, "I'd like to go visit your daughter." Again, another act of providence that I cannot explain, that without my mom being at the right place at the right time, that again shows that there was some divine intervention in my life that wanted me to have a life different than what I have today, or than I had at that day. And so she told me her story. She told me her story in a way that for the first time in my life, I didn't need drugs or alcohol for my mind to quiet. There was a stillness in my brain that to this day, I could not explain. It should not have been possible at that level in my life. And she told me her story. And while it was insanely different than mine, much like what Scarlett said, despite the differences, we can see the similarities in our drinking history, and the powerlessness, and the unmanageability, and the dysfunction of our alcoholism. Those are all the things that I related to. And it says in Dr. Bob's Nightmare, which is one of my favorite stories, the question which naturally might come into your mind would be, what did this man or do or say that was different from what others had done or said? It must be remembered that I had read a great deal and talked to everyone who knew or thought that they knew anything about the subject of alcoholism, but this was a man who had experienced years of frightful drinking, who had had most of all the drunkard's experiences known to man, but who had been cured by the very means I had been trying to employ, that is to say, the spiritual approach. I had no experience with Alcoholics Anonymous except for setting up those chairs and those parents that tried to 12-step me, and that teacher who lovingly showed me the program without me knowing it. And what she did, I cannot explain to you why it was different, but I wanted whatever it was that she had. And I think that my higher power knew that if I was placed in jail and all of the right things were at the right time, I would be desperate and fearful enough to do exactly what God wanted me to do. And so I did. Carol made sure that I got a big book and a 12 and 12, which was the only reading material that I had and the only friends I had in that cell. Because again, I am still not fit to be around other people according to anyone else. And so they leave me by myself. But I got a lot of reading done. And as I mentioned, my first 4-step was 54 pages long. And I did it exactly how it talks about in the big book, where I listed out all the columns on all kinds of yellow paper. It took me 4 envelopes to send it to her because you were limited to 11 pages per envelope. There are some things I do remember. And from that moment to this one, I don't even know that 10 minutes will sum it up beautifully. But when I got out of jail, I went to my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous at Winchester Fellowship, and Cammie told her story. And she told the story of how her son had passed away and how she didn't drink over it. And I didn't know it at the time, but I was going to need that woman. Because at 5 years sober, one of my younger brothers would get hit by a drunk driver while he was walking home in a crosswalk at 3 o'clock in the morning and lay there for 12 hours till a cop found him. I would need that woman when my other younger brother got murdered sitting in his car at a stoplight at 21 years old. I would need that woman when my best friend would kill herself with a needle in her arm in a closet all by herself. Every single time that I have had things that have happened in my life, I have called that woman because she showed me in that moment of desperation that there is things that we have to do, people who will understand and that can walk you through anything and everything that happens in your life. And that has been my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. There has never been a single thing that I have done alone in this program. I have been almost every service position you can think of. I actually love general service, as much as people hate to hear me say that. The political process of AA, I think, is absolutely beautiful, even though it takes a really long time. I think that the group consensus and the group conscience process is the most beautiful way to make sure every single voice, including the one of dissent or of the tiniest minority, gets heard. I have learned so many life skills by reading the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. When it came to my relationship, I read To the Wives. When it comes to my sponsees, I read Working with Others. When it comes to my job, I read To the Employers. When I'm feeling alone and I have traveled all over the world for my job and I can't get to a meeting, I read a story in the back of the book because that's what somebody taught me to do. I still call my sponsor almost every single day. In fact, she lives 2 blocks away from me and I walk by her house almost every single day with my dog and we wave at each other from the kitchen window. You know, I have 6 sponsees. I work with them every single week. I read the book to them and I walk them through the big book the same way that when I got out of jail, I was walked through the big book. I've worked multiple programs that end in an A because, as I mentioned, I didn't come with just one set of problems. And those tools have helped me be able to not only work with other alcoholics, but to be a daughter to the mother who was never really a mother to me. She saved my butt, but she does not have the motherly instinct. And she is a cold, frigid little woman. I get to lovingly be her caretaker and daughter today. Like I literally dropped her. I was 5 minutes late for the reading portion because I dropped off banana bread to my mom before coming here. And she lives way out of the way from coming to this meeting. You know, those are the things that I do today. I reach out and I ask for help. I still go to a meeting almost every single day, 18 years later. I've lived in 4 different states. I have ended relationships, started new ones, just got engaged, actually have picked my venue and my wedding date just this last week and had a complete meltdown on Friday because I was absolutely overwhelmed and did not know what to do. And I picked up the phone, called a friend who was married just in the last 2 years, and she talked to me about how she had her own little meltdown. You know, those are the things that I do. I have a group of women. I have people sitting in this audience right now who I did not know were going to come tonight. but there are people who came because we love each other and we participate in each other's lives. And I didn't have that before I got here. I didn't know how to be a sibling. I didn't know how to be a daughter. I didn't know even really how to be a mother to my stepdaughter. I have an incredible relationship with a woman who I did not have to give birth to. I was her stepmom for 9 years in and out of the program. And today I am the only parent she has. She does not talk to either one of her birth parents. I'm the only grandmother that her daughter knows. And her daughter loves my partner more than me. I actually get a little resentful sometimes because when we FaceTime, she's like, Pop, Pop. I'm like, what the? I'm like, what happened to Nani? And she's like, bye, but I can accept that today because she's never had a Pop, Pop. She's never had anything like that. I've been around since the day she was born. He's new, he's fresh, and she loves him. And I love watching that stuff today. I love the life that Alcoholics Anonymous has taught me how to live. It talks about in the big book that this is a design for living. In the big book, the word must is said 92 times. 92 times there is some derivative of must in the big book. That is an instruction. While we are a program of suggestion, it says in Bill's story, there are rules that must be followed. The reason for that is because it allows us to be able to function and live in a society that without it, we would all wither and die. I know today that it is never about what lies behind me or what lies before me, but I know today that God lies within me. I have an incredible relationship with a higher power today that every single morning I get up and say, thank you for allowing me to be sober today. Give me the courage to be the person that you want me to be today. Help remove everything from me that no longer belongs here. And let me do my best. Allow me to learn something so that I can go out and be different than I was before. Because I don't ever want to go back. I don't. The only thing that I want to use my past for is to help other people overcome their own. And what I absolutely love in Dr. Bob's Nightmare is what it says about service work and why we do what we do in Alcoholics Anonymous. It says on the bottom of page 180, it is the most wonderful blessing to be relieved of the terrible curse with which I was afflicted. My health is good and I have regained my self-respect and the respect of my colleagues. My home life is ideal and my business is as good as can be expected in these uncertain times. I spend a great deal of time passing on what I learned to others who want and need it badly. I do this for 4 reasons. 1 is a sense of duty. 2, it is a pleasure, and it truly is. 3, because in so doing, I am passing my debt to the man who took time to pass it on to me. And 4, because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. I have written at the bottom of that page, this is a program for people who want it and work it, even though they may need it. The work only works if you work it. If you're here and you're running around the rim and you're not quite sure how to work the program, make a new friend, extend your hand, ask the person next to you how they've done what they've done to get where they are. It doesn't mean you have to do what they do, but listen, be open-minded enough to know that you're in this room for a reason. Your higher power, whether it's the doorknob, whether it's the group of drunks, whether it's the guidance and overwhelming despair, whatever you choose to call your higher power, it has brought you to this moment in this room for an exact reason. And if you stick around long enough, you're going to figure out what it is. But don't ask why, ask for the what. What do I do next? What do you want of me? And what can I do to work this program? And if you do those things, your life will change with or without your permission. Thank you.